Function can do is like plan out the steps. They understand that, okay, if I need to clean my room, these are the 6 things that need to happen. So what people with executive dysfunction experience is paralysis around goals. So what that means is like they know, like the 3-year-old theoretically knows what a clean room looks like. And if I ask her like what in the room looks dirty, she can tell me that. So what's really frustrating about people with executive dysfunction is that they have insight into their dysfunction. But what's incredibly frustrating about this is that despite the insight, it doesn't actually change your brain and allow your brain to actually do it. So you like the 3-year-old can understand what a clean room looks like, can understand that her room is dirty, but that abstract level understanding is not the same as the frontal lobes being able to chunk down that task. So really what executive function is the ability to take one task and like chunk it into pieces, right? So when I plan and execute, like here's find a job or clean a room. And it's being able to, like this process is what's messed up with executive dysfunction, okay? And understanding it, insight into it is not the same. It's the ability to like think through what to do. So another example is like, you know, sometimes we'll have like, let's say like you're hosting a party. So people who are event planners have really good executive function. So like they like plan out this big task. Okay, let's throw a wedding. This has to get done. 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 So they're very good, like very organized. So the problem with executive dysfunction is that we aren't able to like figure out how to chunk up a task and execute on it. And it feels incredibly paralyzing because our brain is literally not able to do this. So if we think about how do you start on a task that's too big? You can't. So this is why people feel paralyzed, because if the task is too big, you literally cannot do it. Like I can't, like if I were to tell you, you know, win a Nobel Prize, like how do you even start with that? Like that's crazy. Like you may be able to theoretically map out what needs to be done, but you can't actually break it apart into like its subsequent pieces and actually execute on it. So then the question is what to do about executive dysfunction, actually. And this is where there are a couple of things to recognize. So when people have paralysis and executive dysfunction, there are a couple of different components. So when you're paralyzed towards a behavior, there are 3 things that I'd like to talk about. The first is operationalize. So what this means is like there's actually a formal process that you can get trained in to do this. So this is what we call operationalizing problems. In gamer terminology, so like back when we did a lot of work with gamers, I know we still do a lot of work with gamers, but I used to do a lot of work specifically around video game addiction. And what I would teach people is how to change an open-ended problem. So this is something like win a Nobel Prize or find a job into a close-ended problem. So what that means is to essentially go through the process of converting an abstract thing into like a discrete quest goal. So like forget about the quest chain. We're gonna like, because we can't map out the quest chain. So, or actually what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a goal and we're gonna map it onto what we call a quest chain. And then the quest chain will have discrete pieces. So this is called operationalizing problems, which gamers are bad at. The really interesting thing is that gamers are actually better than the average population at this piece. So if you give a gamer a very discrete task, and you give them an end goal and you give them all the pieces, they will actually outperform regular people when it comes to doing that task. So this is a real scenario, okay? I was taking a class at Harvard Business School. And in the class at Harvard Business School, we were given a case and we were told to solve this problem about how to optimize flow through a urology clinic. literally I was swamped at the time. So I logged onto Discord and I was like, hey, do you guys want to help me with this? And I just uploaded this Harvard Business School case to a group of my degenerate gamer friends. And the next day they like came up with like 4 or 5 solutions. I went into class 2 days later. I had the solutions for my gamer buddies and they're like, what do you do? And I was like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And the professor was like, that's brilliant. No understanding of medicine, no understanding of MBA stuff, no understanding of any of that crap. If you give them a close-ended task and give them the parameters, gamers are good at this. Gamers are bad at this. So if you have a problem with executive dysfunction, the first thing that you need to do is learn how to turn this into this. So that's called operationalizing problems. There's actually an exercise that we share in Dr. K's guide. So we talk a lot about this in Dr. K's guide, but I'll share the exercise with you now. So this is what I tell people who have executive dysfunction, like as a therapist. What I'll say is pretend you are paralyzed from the neck down, and pretend you have a servant who will do exactly what you tell them to do. How would you tell them to like accomplish this task? So in the terms of like finding a job, it's like you're paralyzed. So you like literally have to tell them, go to my computer, log in, open a web browser, do a Google search for jobs available in, Washington, D.C. What do you see there? Okay, then do this, then do this, then do this. And what I find with people who have executive dysfunction is that when you really like work them through that process, they will actually be able to like execute on tasks. So the first thing is operationalizing problems. Second problem with executive dysfunction is frustration and emotions. A lot of people with executive dysfunction also have ADHD or the other way around. So people with ADHD have trouble like with executive function, okay? So this is the really interesting thing, is that I find that when you're paralyzed towards behavior, there's like a practical component to it. But there's also this component of like feeling so damn dumb and feeling so damn incompetent and frustrated with yourself that it actually negatively impacts your behavior. Because if we think about like what promotes behavior, right? So like it's not frustration and negative emotion. It's like inspiration and confidence. So what people with executive dysfunction literally have to do in order to improve their dysfunction is digest these emotions. So we'll do therapy around this. Because anytime you're thinking about taking a behavior, right? Like, so if I have an idea and then I want to take an action, what goes in here? What is this composed of? It's composed of operationalizing, and then there's going to be good emotions, and there's going to be bad emotions, right? So there's like a war between my good emotions and my bad emotions in terms of whether I take the action or not. If I think I'm going to fail, if like, if I think I'm good at it, like if I feel confident, then I'll take the action. So those are a couple of the pieces that go into it, okay? So we're paralyzed towards a behavior. We have to learn how to operationalize. We have to learn how to like deal with our negative emotions and frustration. I think generally speaking, I just do 2 things with them. So we tend to get to processing their negative emotions, and then we operationalize problems. And we use that exercise, and that tends to be actually like the way that you deal with executive dysfunction. And the third thing to remember is that over time, you will actually improve. Okay? Yeah, so people are talking about meditation. Absolutely. So you can also do meditation, right? So it's good. Thank you, Chad. See, Chad is learning. So if we talk about strengthening your frontal lobes, meditation actually strengthens your MPFC, your medial prefrontal cortex, which is going to be like a big part of what we want to talk about when it comes to operationalizing problems. I think another thing that we want to talk a little bit about is you have to be careful about the thoughts that keep you from starting. So this is also like another cognitive skill that you can learn. So anytime someone has, this is related to the emotions, but like if you think about problems with operationalizing, like this is where the what ifs happen, right? We were talking about the what ifs earlier. What if? So there are a lot of thoughts that keep you from starting. This kind of has to do a little bit with like procrastination. So sometimes like, perfection can actually keep you paralyzed as well. Like you want to do it perfect. You don't want to like get a B, so you're not even going to try for, until you're sure you can get an A, you're not even going to, you'd rather have an F than a 10% or 90% chance for an A, right? You want a 100% chance of an A or an F. So this is where there are particular like psychological complexes or cognitive things which you can actually work on. These are almost like sum scars, so we talk about a couple of these in Dr. K's guides. I'll try to map more stuff out. But when it comes to solving executive dysfunction, it gets better with time. You have to learn how to operationalize, which you can practically do. Deal with the negative emotions that keep you from acting. You can absolutely meditate. And then the fourth thing is that there are particular thoughts, there are particular other challenges that arise which have specific solutions to them. Questions about executive function. Does it degrade after the age of 32? Not really. Is it different from motivational issues? No. So here's the problem. There's no Sanskrit word for motivation. So motivation, I think, is one of the worst words in the English language because it lumps together all of these disparate processes under like one term. It's like, and so the problem, like if you look at like solutions to motivation, like if you do a Google search for like solutions to motivation, you will find a million websites with a bunch of people who will sell you their product for like how to get more motivated. And we are guilty of that too. The problem is like, if there are all these solutions to motivation, like why isn't everyone super motivated? None of them work. Why don't they work? Because it's a problem of misdiagnosis. Motivational problems could be ADHD. It could be executive dysfunction. It could be trauma. It could be like a lack of clarity of goal. It could be that you're not motivated because it's something you should do instead of something that you care about. There are all kinds of like nuances to motivation. It's actually a bunch of different neuroscientific, psychological, and spiritual problems. And the way that I help motivate people is because like I don't call it motivation. It's like, what's your actual problem? So you could look at someone with executive dysfunction and you could say this person has a problem with motivation, but they're absolutely, they can't act when they want to act, right? That's what motivation is. But if you look at it like their actual problem is not a lack of motivation, that's a symptom. Their problem is executive dysfunction. And so in that way, a lack of motivation has a differential diagnosis that includes a lot of different things. I want to talk to y'all today a little bit about something that I call reintegration anxiety, which is kind of weird, okay? So this is what I noticed. Something weird happened, chat. So back at the start of the pandemic, there were, everyone was like, oh, I'm stuck at home. Like the Journal of the American Medical Association did a study that showed that depressive symptoms are 300% worse than they used to be. Anxiety was getting worse. People didn't know if they were going to be able to pay their bills. They didn't know what was going to happen to the economy. They didn't know if they were going to be able to pay their rent. And so everyone was like, oh my God, the mental impacts of COVID are so bad, man. They suck so hard. And now that things are starting to open up, it's kind of like weird because everyone was like, I can't wait for COVID to end. I can't wait for COVID to end. But now that COVID is maybe starting to end, I know that Delta variant is bad, but people are getting vaccinated. People are starting to open things up. People are sort of like, okay, so are you thrilled that you're going to be back in school and like hanging out with people socially? Something weird has happened, especially with a lot of the students that I work with, where they're kind of like, actually, I feel really anxious about reintegrating into society. Like what I hear from students that I work with is, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to like do school anymore. Like, I don't know if I can do school. And now that I can socialize with people, it's like, oh my God, I can't wait to socialize with people. And it's like, now when you think about socializing with people, you want to do it, but you feel like really, really anxious about it. And it's really weird, but the best term that I can kind of come up with is something that I'd call reintegration anxiety. And so it's kind of weird, but there seems to be a new kind of anxiety where everyone's been waiting to get back into society. But at the same time, like now that we're able to do it, it seems actually really hard to reintegrate into society. So what I'd like to do today is talk to you guys a little bit about this and sort of try to explain a little bit about how I understand it, okay? So to begin with, when COVID hit, everyone was sort of like, kind of positive about it. Like, people felt isolated, people felt depressed, people felt anxious about the future. They had difficulty maintaining social connections, and they actually turned to online communities to start to socialize with people. And the cool thing is that if you kind of look at, data, or not data, because there aren't really a whole lot of studies about this, but if you look at people from our community, what we found is that people who have robust online connections were actually a little bit resilient to the negative impacts of COVID. And what we did as a society is we turned to like more online interactions. And that's sort of a double-edged sword, because research does show that spending a lot of time on social media actually has negative impacts on your mental health. And at the same time, we were kind of stuck because we couldn't spend time with people in the real world. So like, it was nice to have like Discord and Twitch and things like that, gaming. And so it was sort of like a little bit of a double-edged sword, where like gamers were somewhat resilient, but were engaging in more social media. So sometimes that can make mental health stuff worse. So it's kind of a wash. The interesting thing is that if you talk to people who engage a lot in online communities and like engage with people socially online as opposed to the real world, what you find is when they go back out into the real world, you can form a real connection online. But when you go back out into the real world, it seems to be hard for people. And so what I found is that, especially now, like working with a lot of students, that, they've been hanging out on Discord for the last year. They've been doing online school and like Zoom classes and all this kind of stuff. And they've like hated it in some ways, but at the same time, it's been sort of like comforting in some ways. Oh no. So when COVID started, everyone was like, there were huge impacts to our negative health. People felt isolated, they felt depressed, they felt anxious. Studies showed that like depression and anxiety was like 3 times worse than prior to COVID. The isolation was really, really messing with people. The gaming community was somewhat resilient to these effects, especially at the beginning, because we already had good online support systems. And the rest of the world shockingly switched over to like this online world where this is how we socialize. It was Zoom birthday parties and like hanging out with people over like Discord and WhatsApp and stuff like that. And so this was okay for a while, right? So people like, especially in the gaming community, we did okay for a while. But then as the pandemic wore on, people were like, I can't wait to get back in school. I can't wait to like see my friends again. This sucks. I'm trapped in my house. And so then something weird happened. Like, now that things are opening up and we're like, hey, you can go socialize again, and like, you're going to be back in school. Like, the people that I work with are like, wait a minute. I actually feel really, really uncomfortable with that stuff. And now they come to my office and they say things like, I'm not sure I can actually do school anymore. I'm not sure, like I got invited to a party, but like, I don't know if I even want to go. And people are really confused by this, because they're like, at the beginning of the pandemic, it's like, okay, we're going to be trapped for a couple weeks. Like, I'm going to learn how to bake bread. I'm going to learn a new language. I'm going to like learn all this stuff. I'm going to take this as an opportunity. And then the isolation sets in, the depression sets in. I'm going to work on a project. And now that the world is opening up again, everyone's like, oh God, thank God. Like that, oh, I can start doing things again. And now when you try to do things, like, it seems actually really, really hard to go out and like get back into school. And I have students that come to me and are saying, I'm not sure I can do school anymore. Like, I hate Zoom school, but I don't know if I can actually cut it in real school. I have people who are like, I'm so isolated, I'm so lonely, I'm so depressed. Do you want to go to this party? No, I feel super anxious going to the party. So what's going on here? Why is this happening, and what can we do about it? So this is something that, for lack of a better term, I call reintegration anxiety, which is sort of like this tendency to not be able to like go back into the world. And what I actually have found is that I think that it correlates with some interesting principles of neuroscience. Why is there someone in my door? Okay, so going back to where things are. So here's my understanding of like how reintegration anxiety works, okay? So when we start socializing with people online, what tends to happen is that our brain has certain like social circuits, which sometimes don't get used and so start to rust a little bit. So if we think about how our brain works, what we discover is that if you don't use a part of your brain, it kind of like starts to rust. So if I speak 2 languages and then I don't speak one of those languages for a few years, what happens is that part of my brain is sort of like, oh, we don't need this anymore, so let's get rid of it. And what I found in people who interact a lot online is that there are social circuits that start to go like dormant or rust. So there are parts of our brain that will look at body language, facial expression, tone, other things like even like physical touch, and use those as means to kind of socially reassure us. So when I interact with people a lot, there are circuits in my brain that are very active that are telling me, hey, these people like you. Like they're sort of interpreting all of this information about people's body language and the way that they interact with me and their facial expressions and things like that. And it uses that information to reassure me. And what happens when we interact with people a lot online is those circuits of our brain kind of like don't get used, right? Because if I'm talking to people on a Discord call, like sure, it may be a video chat, but especially if I'm playing games and stuff, like I'm not going to be interpreting their body language and their facial expressions. And if we think about the way that our mind looks at a social situation and tells us whether to be anxious or not anxious, what it'll do is include a lot of like information about stuff like facial expressions and body language. So when these circuits in our mind go dormant, what happens is we're left with a big question mark. And if you think about what anxiety is, the bigger the question mark is, the bigger your anxiety is going to be. Because anxiety is all about uncertainty, right? So if I think about, I'm anxious about going to the party, and I ask people like, if I ask someone, why are you anxious about the party? They'll say things like, I don't know who's going to be there. I don't know if I'm going to say something stupid. I don't know if people are going to like me. So a lot of anxieties have to do with I don't knows. You don't know what's going to happen. It's uncertain. And so as we sort of turn to online interaction and some of these other circuits of our brain go dormant, what we're left with is more and more question marks. And the more we're left with question marks, the more likely we are to feel anxious. So now what's happened is we have these reassuring parts of our brain, which normally will help us feel comfortable in social situations, that have basically been dormant for a year to a year and a half. And so I think this is part of the reason that we're experiencing what I call reintegration anxiety. We also sort of see this when it comes to online schooling. So like, in school, it requires like particular faculties. Like I have to wake up at a particular time. I have to show up. I have to shower. I have to do these kinds of things, which online school sort of insulates me from, and I don't have to do those things. So as those parts of our brain get rusty, we start to understandably start to feel somewhat concerned about being able to kind of reintegrate into regular school. And so what we kind of end up with is this situation where we're basically like,
Dun, 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 dun. Nagtatanong ang isip Do do do. Narito ako, handang umibig sa iyo. Narito ako, handang umibig sa iyo. Nawalan katapusan ang pangangamba. Dapat bang isipin walang hanggan? Asahan mo na kahit kailan hindi kita babayaan, kahit kailan. Kahit kailan. Kahit na ano pang mangyayari, di maaari pagbalik. I'm at end my stream right now. Maybe I should just stream Kovacs next time. Yeah.